I woke up that Tuesday morning to find my koi pond completely empty, the concrete basin exposed like a wound and 24 expensive Japanese koi flopping desperately in the mud at the bottom. That was my first clue that the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association had finally lost whatever remained of their collective sanity. My name is Lucas Emerson, and I had lived in this upscale neighborhood outside Charlotte, North Carolina for 7 years without major incident. Sure, the HOA sent occasional letters about my grass being a quarter-inch too long or my mailbox needing a fresh coat of paint, but nothing prepared me for what happened that spring. I had spent 3 years building that pond in my backyard, getting all the proper permits from the county, creating a genuine ecosystem that attracted dragonflies, frogs, turtles, and even a great blue heron that visited every evening. The pond was my sanctuary, my retirement project, my pride and joy. I sprinted outside in my bathrobe, nearly tripping over the garden hose as I rushed to save my fish. The morning sun was already beating down, and I could see some of the koi had stopped moving. My heart hammered in my chest as I grabbed buckets, filling them with water from the hose and frantically scooping up fish. My hands shook as I worked, mud coating my arms up to the elbows. No, I muttered, grabbing a beautiful platinum ogon that had cost me $400. She was still breathing, barely. I dropped her into a bucket and moved to the next fish, and the next, working like a madman against time and heat. My neighbor, Tom Richardson, appeared at the fence line. "Lucas, what the hell happened?" "Someone drained my pond," I shouted back, not stopping my rescue efforts. "Call animal control, call the Wildlife Commission, call somebody." Tom disappeared, and I kept working. Out of 24 koi, I managed to save 17 by getting them into buckets in my bathtub. 7 fish died in my arms, their scales dull, their bodies limp. Each one felt like losing a pet. I had named them all, knew their personalities, watched them grow from fingerlings. After the immediate crisis passed, I stood in my destroyed backyard, covered in mud and pond water, staring at the empty basin. That is when I noticed the official HOA notice staked into the ground near the edge of the pond. My hands trembled with rage as I pulled it out and read it. Notice of violation. The pond structure at 847 Maple Ridge Court has been deemed non-compliant with Willowbrook Estates aesthetic standards, as per Article 7, Section 4.2 of the HOA bylaws. The structure creates visual disruption to the neighborhood's cohesive landscape design. Water feature has been removed per emergency powers granted to the HOA board. Property owner will be assessed costs of drainage and restoration. Total, $3,200. Payment due within 30 days. I read it 3 times, unable to believe what I was seeing. They had not just drained my pond without warning. They were charging me for the privilege of having my property destroyed. I stormed into my house, still dripping mud across the hardwood floors my wife had refinished 2 years before she passed. I did not care. I grabbed my phone and dialed the HOA office, my finger jabbing the numbers with enough force to crack the screen. "Willowbrook Estates HOA, this is Patricia speaking. This is Lucas Emerson at 847 Maple Ridge Court. I need to speak to whoever is responsible for draining my pond this morning." "Oh, Mr. Emerson, yes. I have notes here about your violation. You will need to schedule an appointment with our board president, Mrs. Cynthia Blackwell, to discuss the matter." "I do not want an appointment. I want to know who authorized trespassing on my property and destroying my pond." Patricia's voice took on that practiced customer service coolness. "Sir, according to the bylaws you signed when you purchased your home, the HOA has the right to enter any property to remedy violations that impact neighborhood aesthetics or property values. Mrs. Blackwell will be happy to explain everything during normal business hours. My fish died. Do you understand that? Living creatures died because of what you people did. I understand you are upset, Mr. Emerson. However, threatening language toward HOA staff will result in additional fines. Would you like to schedule that appointment or not?" I hung up before I said something I would regret. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I looked around my empty house, wishing desperately that Sarah was still here. She would have known exactly what to do. She had always been the calm one, the planner, the person who could navigate bureaucracy without losing her temper. But she had been gone for 18 months now, and I was navigating this nightmare alone. I took a shower, scrubbing the mud from under my fingernails, and forced myself to think clearly. I needed help, real help, not just righteous anger. I dried off, dressed in clean clothes, and started making calls. First, I contacted the Charlotte-Mecklenburg County Permitting Office. A woman named Jennifer confirmed that my pond had been fully permitted, inspected, and approved 3 years ago. She seemed shocked when I explained what had happened. "Mr. Emerson, that is destruction of permitted infrastructure. The HOA does not have the authority to override county permits. You need to file a police report." My second call was to the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. I spoke with a biologist named Marcus Chen, who grew increasingly concerned as I described the situation. "You are telling me they drained a 3-year-old established pond with no notice?" In May, during breeding season, his voice rose with each word. That pond was habitat. We have protections for established wildlife habitat, even on private property. Did you have any protected species using it? I had wood ducks nesting in the box I built. The heron that visited might have been protected, I am not sure. Definitely had several turtle species, green frogs, bullfrogs. Wood ducks are protected migratory birds. If there were active nests, this could be a federal violation of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. I am sending an officer out today. Do not let anyone touch that pond basin until we document everything. My third call was to a lawyer. I found Harriet Garrison through an online search for attorneys specializing in HOA disputes. Her reviews were excellent, and she agreed to see me that afternoon. By the time I finished my calls, it was almost noon. I went outside to check on the koi in my bathtub and various buckets scattered around the house. They were alive but stressed, and I needed a proper temporary solution. I called a pool supply store and ordered a large stock tank that could be delivered that afternoon, along with portable aerators and filters. While I waited, I examined the pond more carefully. The drain valve I had installed for maintenance had been opened, but that alone would not have emptied the pond completely. I found a trash pump hidden in the bushes near the back fence. They had used industrial equipment to drain 18,000 gallons of water in what must have been just a few hours. The electricity cord ran to an outdoor outlet on my own house. They had used my power to destroy my property. I was photographing everything when a North Carolina Wildlife Resources truck pulled into my driveway. Marcus Chen turned out to be a fit man in his 40s with sharp eyes and an official bearing that made me feel like someone was finally taking this seriously. "Mr. Emerson? I am Officer Chen. Show me what happened." I walked him through the entire backyard. He photographed the empty pond, the dead fish I had wrapped in plastic bags as evidence, the notice from the HOA, and the pump. He spent extra time examining the wood duck nesting box mounted on a pole near the pond's edge. "This nest was active," he said, peering inside with a flashlight. "I can see evidence of recent occupation. The ducklings may have already fledged, or this could have disrupted an active nest." He made extensive notes. "Mr. Emerson, this is serious. The HOA does not have the authority to destroy wildlife habitat without consulting our commission. The fact that they did this during breeding season makes it worse." "What happens now?" "I am filing a report that will go to our enforcement division and potentially to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service if we determine federal laws were broken. You should also file a police report for the property damage. The criminal aspect and the wildlife aspect are separate issues." After Officer Chen left, I called the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. They sent an officer who took my statement and photographed the scene again. He seemed less convinced than Chen that any real crime had occurred. "Sir, this is probably a civil matter between you and your HOA. Unless you can prove malicious intent or that they exceeded their authority under your covenant. They killed my fish and destroyed permitted infrastructure," I interrupted. "How is that not criminal?" The officer sighed. "I will file the report, but honestly, you are probably looking at a lawsuit, not criminal charges. Talk to your lawyer." By the time everyone left, it was almost 3 in the afternoon. The stock tank arrived, and I spent the next 2 hours setting it up in my garage, transferring the koi from buckets and bathtub into their temporary home. It was cramped and inadequate, but it would keep them alive while I figured out what to do next. At 4:30, I drove to Harriet Garrison's office in downtown Charlotte. Her law firm occupied the 10th floor of a sleek glass building with a view of the city skyline. She greeted me in the reception area, a woman in her early 50s with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Emerson, come in. Tell me everything." I spent 40 minutes walking her through the whole story, showing her the photos on my phone, the HOA notice, and the police report number. She took notes in a leather portfolio, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Do you have your original HOA bylaws and covenants?" "At home, yes. I need copies of everything. The bylaws, your pond permits, photos of the pond before it was drained, receipts for the fish and equipment, veterinary records if you have them, everything." She leaned back in her chair. "Lucas, I am going to be straight with you. This is one of the most egregious HOA overreaches I have seen in 20 years of practice. The problem is that HOAs in North Carolina have broad authority, and many homeowners do not realize what they have signed away until something like this happens. I had county permits. Doesn't that matter? It should, and we will argue that it does. But HOA covenants are private contracts, and courts often uphold them even when they conflict with common sense. The wildlife angle is your strongest card. If they violated state or federal wildlife protection laws, that gives us leverage the HOA cannot dismiss. What do I do? First, do not pay that assessment. Second, document everything. Third, I am going to send a cease and desist letter to the HOA demanding they not touch your property again and putting them on notice of legal action. Fourth, we are going to demand an emergency hearing with the HOA board. They are required to give you due process before imposing fines or taking enforcement action. They skipped that entirely. How much is this going to cost me? Harriet gave me a sympathetic look. I will be honest. HOA litigation can be expensive. However, if we win, we can recover attorney fees and damages. I suggest we start with the cease and desist and the demand for a hearing. If they are reasonable, maybe we can settle this without a full lawsuit. If not, we go to court. I left her office feeling slightly better but also overwhelmed by how complicated this had become. All I wanted was my pond back, my fish safe, and an apology from whoever thought draining someone's backyard ecosystem was an appropriate response to an aesthetic complaint. That evening, I sat in my garage watching the koi circle their inadequate temporary tank. The largest, a red and white kohaku named Sunset, kept bumping against the walls as if searching for the spacious home she had known. I felt a crushing sense of failure. I had built that pond for Sarah originally. She loved sitting by the water in the evenings, watching the fish and listening to the fountain. After she died, maintaining the pond became my way of staying connected to her memory. The HOA had not just destroyed landscaping. They had violated something sacred. My phone rang. It was Tom from next door. "Lucas, I have been asking around. Apparently Cynthia Blackwell has been on a tear lately about property violations. She cited the Johnsons for their vegetable garden, made the Patels repaint their shutters because the color was one shade off approved, and forced the Martinellis to remove a tire swing because it was visible from the street. Why is she doing this? Rumor is she is trying to inflate property values before selling her own house. Stricter enforcement, more uniform appearance, higher comps. She has been HOA president for 6 months and has made everyone miserable. She picked the wrong guy to mess with. Lucas, be careful. I have heard stories about people who fight their HOAs. It gets ugly." I thanked Tom and hung up. His warning echoed in my mind, but I was already too angry to back down. Cynthia Blackwell had killed my fish, destroyed my wife's memorial, and then sent me a bill for it. Whatever fight she wanted, she was going to get. The next morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was an expanded list of violations. The empty pond basin was now considered an attractive nuisance and a stagnant water hazard, despite being completely empty. The stock tank in my garage violated the provision against agricultural or commercial equipment visible from any angle of the property, even though it was inside a closed garage. My grass, neglected during yesterday's crisis, was now a half-inch over regulation height. Each violation carried a $50 fine per day and to remedied. I called Harriet immediately. "They are retaliating," she said after I read her the new letter. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. They are going to bury you in fines until you comply or give up. Do not pay anything and do not do anything they demand. I will have the cease and desist delivered today." The cease and desist went out via courier at noon. By 3 in the afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Emerson? This is Cynthia Blackwell, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA board." Her voice was exactly what I had imagined, clipped, professional, with an undertone of condescension that made my jaw clench. "We need to discuss your property violations and this unnecessary legal escalation. You drained my pond without notice and killed my fish. What did you expect? Mr. Emerson, your pond violated our architectural guidelines, which you agreed to follow when you purchased your home. The board voted unanimously to remedy the situation. When was I notified of this vote? When was I given a chance to present my case? The board does not require homeowner input for clear violations. Our authority is spelled out in Article 7 of the covenants. I had county permits for that pond. You destroyed permitted infrastructure. County permits are irrelevant to HOA covenants. The two are separate jurisdictions." She sighed as if explaining something to a slow child. "Mr. Emerson, I am trying to help you avoid further fines and legal expenses. If you fill in the pond basin, remove the unsightly tank from your garage, and bring your property into compliance, we can waive the initial assessment and consider this matter closed." "No, I am sorry. No, I am not filling in anything. I am rebuilding my pond, restocking my fish, and you are going to pay for all of it." Her voice turned icy. "Mr. Emerson, you are making a mistake. The HOA has significant resources and legal backing. Fighting us will cost you far more than compliance. Then I guess we will see each other in court." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking again, but this time from adrenaline rather than grief. I was done being pushed around. Harriet called me that evening with news. The HOA responded to our cease and desist by scheduling an emergency board hearing for tomorrow night. You are required to attend. This is your chance to present your case, but Lucas, be prepared. These hearings are usually formalities. The board has already made up their minds. I will be there. I will come with you. Do not say anything I do not approve. Let me do most of the talking. The next evening, I arrived at the Willowbrook Estates Community Center with Harriet. The building was a Mediterranean-style structure with terracotta roof tiles and a fountain out front, all maintained with the HOA dues I paid every month. Inside, a conference room had been set up with a long table where 5 board members sat like judges. Cynthia Blackwell occupied the center seat. She was exactly what I had pictured. Mid-50s, blonde hair styled in a bob with perfect highlights, wearing a cream blazer and pearl earrings. Her makeup was flawless, her posture rigid, and her expression conveyed absolute certainty in her own righteousness. The other board members were less memorable. 2 men in their 60s who looked like retired corporate executives, a woman about Cynthia's age who seemed nervous, and a younger man maybe in his 40s who kept glancing at his phone. Mr. Emerson, thank you for attending, Cynthia began without preamble. This hearing is to address multiple violations at 847 Maple Ridge Court, and to discuss your refusal to comply with remediation orders. Harriet stood. Before we begin, I need clarification on several procedural issues. Was Mr. Emerson given proper notice before the board took action to drain his pond? Cynthia barely glanced at her. The board acted under emergency authority granted in Article 7, Section 4 of the Covenants. Emergency situations do not require advance notice. What was the emergency? A decorative pond that had existed for 3 years without incident. The pond had become a breeding ground for mosquitoes and created an aesthetic blight visible from neighboring properties. Multiple complaints were filed. I want to see those complaints, Harriet said. Under North Carolina HOA law, homeowners have the right to review all documents related to enforcement actions against them. Cynthia's jaw tightened. We will provide those in due course. Tonight's hearing is about Mr. Emerson's refusal to comply with remediation. Tonight's hearing is about the HOA exceeding its authority and destroying permitted property without due process, Harriet countered. Mr. Emerson had county-issued permits for that pond. You had no right to touch it. One of the older men spoke up. Mrs. Garrison, County permits do not supersede HOA covenants. This has been established in multiple court cases. Not when the HOA violates state and federal wildlife protection laws. Mr. Emerson's pond was established habitat supporting protected migratory birds. The North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission is investigating this incident as a potential violation of state and federal statutes. That got their attention. The nervous woman whispered something to Cynthia, who shot her a silencing look. We were not aware of any protected species, Cynthia said carefully, because you did not bother to check before you acted. You saw something you did not like and you destroyed it. Harriet placed a folder on the table. This contains photos of the pond before it was drained, county permit documentation, and a preliminary report from Wildlife Officer Marcus Chen documenting evidence of protected wood duck nesting activity. If the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service determines you violated the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, we're looking at federal fines up to $15,000 per bird affected. The room went silent. The younger man finally looked up from his phone, his eyes wide. This is absurd, Cynthia said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. This is a homeowner dispute, not a federal case. You made it a federal case when you destroyed wildlife habitat, Harriet replied. Now my client is willing to consider a settlement. The HOA will pay to rebuild the pond to its original specifications, compensate Mr. Emerson for his lost fish and plants, reimburse his legal fees, and issue a formal apology. In exchange, he will not pursue criminal charges or assist the Wildlife Commission with their investigation beyond what is legally required. Cynthia looked like she had bitten into a lemon. The board needs to discuss this privately. You have 48 hours, Harriet said. After that, we file a civil suit for damages and ask the court to remove the current board for gross negligence and overreach. We left the hearing without waiting for a response. In the parking lot, Harriet turned to me with a slight smile. That went better than I expected. They are scared. Do you think they will settle? Cynthia Blackwell does not strike me as someone who admits defeat easily, but the other board members looked worried. If the Wildlife Commission confirms a violation, the HOA's insurance might not cover it. That comes out of the neighborhood's reserves, which affects everyone's property values. The board members could be personally liable. Good, I said coldly. Over the next 2 days, I monitored the koi constantly, maintaining water quality in the stock tank and praying none of them developed infections from the stress. I also documented everything about the original pond. Measurements, water volume, plant species, fish inventory with original purchase receipts. The total value of what had been destroyed exceeded $30,000 when I included labor and 3 years of care. On the second day, Harriet called with news. They want to meet. Just Cynthia and me to discuss terms. She does not want the full board involved. Why not? Because she is probably trying to save face. If she can make this go away quietly, maybe the other members will not realize how badly she screwed up, or she is going to try to intimidate me privately. Either way, I am meeting her tomorrow. The meeting took place at a coffee shop in Charlotte. Harriet recorded the whole thing on her phone with Cynthia's reluctant permission. Afterward, Harriet called me with a mixture of amusement and disgust in her voice. She offered $5,000 to fill in the pond and drop the matter. That is insulting. I told her so. I also told her that Officer Chen confirmed the wood duck nest was active when the pond was drained. 2 ducklings were found dead near the property line the morning after. The Wildlife Commission is referring the case to federal authorities. She killed ducklings? I felt sick. She ordered the pond drained without checking what lived there. The legal responsibility is the same. I countered with $50,000 in damages, full pond restoration, and her resignation from the board. What did she say? She said she would rather spend $100,000 fighting us than admit wrongdoing, so we are going to court. Harriet filed the lawsuit 3 days later. We sued the HOA for trespassing, property damage, destruction of permitted infrastructure, violation of due process, and emotional distress. We also named Cynthia Blackwell personally for gross negligence and abuse of authority. The lawsuit made local news. A reporter from the Charlotte Observer called me for an interview and I told him everything. The story ran with the headline, HOA drains homeowner's pond kills protected wildlife in neighborhood beautification dispute. It included photos of my empty pond, the dead koi, and the wood duck nesting box. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone blew up with calls from other homeowners in Willowbrook estates who had their own horror stories about Cynthia Blackwell. The Johnsons, whose vegetable garden had been cited, were growing food to supplement a tight retirement budget. The Patel's shutters were the wrong color because the approved shade had been discontinued and they used the closest match. The Martinellis' tire swing was a memorial to their son who had died in a car accident. Every story painted Cynthia as a petty tyrant using HOA rules to harass people for personal satisfaction. Tom Richardson organized a meeting of aggrieved homeowners at his house. 23 people showed up, nearly a quarter of the neighborhood. Everyone had a complaint. Some had been fined, others just intimidated into compliance. A few had considered selling their homes just to escape the HOA harassment. We need to recall the board, someone suggested. Do the bylaws allow that? Another asked. I had Harriet conference call into the meeting. She explained that North Carolina law allowed homeowners to call a special election to recall board members with a petition signed by 20% of homeowners. You have that many people in this room right now, she said. If you can get signatures, you can force a recall election. The movement gained momentum quickly. Within a week, we had signatures from 40% of the neighborhood. A recall election was scheduled for the first week of June. All 5 board members would face votes of confidence. Meanwhile, the legal case progressed. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service sent investigators who confirmed that 2 wood duckling deaths were directly attributable to the pond draining. They issued a notice of violation to the HOA for violation of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. The fine was $12,000. The North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission issued their own penalties. $8,000 for destruction of established wildlife habitat without a permit. The HOA's insurance company denied coverage, stating that intentional acts of destruction were not covered under the policy. The board was personally responsible for $20,000 in federal and state fines. That changed everything. The other 4 board members turned on Cynthia. The nervous woman, whose name was Patricia Morton, resigned immediately. One of the older men, Gerald Thompson, called me personally to apologize. I voted to approve the pond draining, but Cynthia told us it was just a muddy hole breeding mosquitoes. She showed us photos from a weird angle that made it look terrible. We had no idea it was actually a beautiful water feature with permits and wildlife. I am so sorry, Mr. Emerson, this is not what I signed up for. Then vote to settle the lawsuit, I said. I will try. But Cynthia controls the board. She is threatening to sue any of us personally if we settle without her approval. The recall election happened on a Saturday. Nearly 70% of homeowners voted, an unprecedented turnout. All 5 board members were recalled by overwhelming margins. Cynthia Blackwell lost her vote 9-1. A new emergency board was elected that same day. Tom Richardson became president. The Johnsons and Patels joined the board, along with 2 other level-headed homeowners who had no interest in petty enforcement. Tom's first act as president was to call me. Lucas, we want to settle. Tell us what you need. I had Harriet draft a settlement agreement. The HOA would pay $45,000 in damages, cover all my legal fees, issue a formal written apology, and pay for complete pond restoration by a professional contractor of my choosing. The settlement also included a new bylaw protecting existing permitted structures from arbitrary HOA enforcement. The new board approved it unanimously, but Cynthia Blackwell was not done. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from her personal attorney threatening to sue me for defamation. She claimed my statements to the media had damaged her reputation and caused her emotional distress. Harriet laughed when I showed her the letter. She cannot sue you for telling the truth. Everything you said was documented fact. Let her waste her money on a lawyer. Cynthia never followed through on the threat, but she did not go quietly. She attended the next HOA meeting, standing up during public comment to deliver a 20-minute tirade about how ungrateful homeowners had destroyed her reputation and betrayed her selfless service to the community. Tom finally cut her off. "Mrs. Blackwell, your time is up. Please sit down or leave. You are all going to regret this," she shouted. "Property values are going to tank because you let people do whatever they want. Vegetable gardens, colored shutters, ponds full of mosquitoes. This neighborhood is going to turn into a slum, Mrs. Blackwell. Leave now or I am calling the police." She left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. That was the last time most of us saw Cynthia Blackwell. Her house went on the market a month later, listed at an absurdly inflated price that reflected her delusions more than market reality. It sat unsold for 6 months before she finally dropped the price to something reasonable. Meanwhile, my pond was being rebuilt. The contractor I hired, a woman named Heather Grantham who specialized in natural water features, was a miracle worker. She not only restored the original pond but improved it with better filtration, more natural-looking stonework, and additional planting shelves for aquatic vegetation. "This is going to be even better than before," she promised. "We will create layers of habitat so you get more diversity. And I am adding a deeper section so the fish have somewhere to go in winter." The reconstruction took 6 weeks. I visited the site every day, watching the pond take shape. Heather and her crew worked meticulously, respecting the space and understanding what it meant to me. When they filled the pond for the first time, I stood there watching the water level rise and felt something release in my chest. The fountain began to bubble, the sound familiar and comforting. Aquatic plants were positioned around the edges. The water was crystal clear. "Give it 2 weeks to cycle before you add fish," Heather said. "The ecosystem needs time to establish." I waited impatiently, testing water quality daily. Officer Chen stopped by to check on the progress. "This looks fantastic, Mr. Emerson. When you are ready, I can put you in touch with a wildlife rehabilitator who has some wood ducks that need release sites. If you are interested in hosting them, absolutely." 2 weeks after the pond was filled, I began transferring the koi from their garage tank back to their proper home. They seemed to remember it, swimming eagerly through the space, exploring every corner. Sunset, the big kohaku, immediately claimed her favorite spot near the waterfall. Over the following weeks, the pond came alive. Dragonflies appeared within days. Frogs moved in from somewhere, their evening chorus resuming. A turtle climbed onto the basking rock. And one evening in late July, I looked up to see a great blue heron standing at the edge of the pond, watching the fish with ancient patience. I did not mind sharing. In August, Officer Chen arrived with 2 juvenile wood ducks in a transport crate. We released them at the pond, and they immediately began dabbling in the shallows, completely at ease. "They will migrate in fall," Chen explained. "But they might come back next spring to nest. Wood ducks have strong site fidelity. They are welcome anytime." The settlement money from the HOA covered everything. The pond restoration, the replacement koi, new plants, and even some upgrades I had not originally planned. I still had $15,000 left over, which I donated to the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission for habitat conservation work. Life in Willowbrook Estates improved dramatically under new management. Tom and the new board focused on genuine issues like maintaining common areas and enforcing reasonable standards without harassing homeowners over trivialities. The neighborhood felt friendlier, less anxious. People started talking to each other again instead of worrying about being reported for violations. The Johnsons' vegetable garden flourished, and they started sharing produce with neighbors. The Paddles painted their whole house a beautiful sage green that actually looked better than the boring beige everyone else had. The Martinellis added a plaque to their tire swing memorial, and people occasionally left flowers. In September, I received notification that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had completed their investigation. They determined that the HOA's actions violated federal law, but since the board responsible had been removed and significant restitution had been made, they were closing the case with the fines already assessed. However, Cynthia Blackwell's personal role was noted in the report as demonstrating willful negligence in wildlife protection. That report had consequences I had not anticipated. In October, I got a call from Harriet. "Lucas, you are not going to believe this. The county prosecutor is considering criminal charges against Cynthia Blackwell." "What? For what?" "Destruction of protected wildlife, trespassing, possibly fraud related to how she presented the situation to the board. Apparently, the federal report caught someone's attention, and they started digging. She may have falsified documents to get board approval. I just wanted my pond back. I never intended for anyone to go to jail." "I know. But Lucas, she broke laws. Multiple laws. This is out of your hands now. The state decides whether to prosecute." The county prosecutor did decide to file charges, 3 counts: unlawful taking of protected wildlife, criminal trespass, and fraud. Each carried potential jail time. The trial happened the following February. I was called to testify. Sitting in the witness box looking across at Cynthia Blackwell in a conservative Navy suit, I felt an odd mixture of emotions. Anger, certainly, for what she had done, but also sadness that someone had become so consumed with control and appearance that she destroyed living things without a second thought. I told my story truthfully. The morning I found my pond drained, the desperate rescue of my fish, the 7 that died, the wood ducklings found dead near the property. I showed photos of the before and after. I explained the 3 years of work that had gone into creating that ecosystem. The prosecutor asked, "Mr. Emerson, in your opinion, did Mrs. Blackwell know that her actions would harm wildlife?" I do not know what she knew, but I know she did not care enough to find out. Cynthia's defense attorney argued that she was simply enforcing HOA rules, that she had no intent to harm wildlife, that this was an unfortunate accident, not a crime. He painted her as a dedicated volunteer overwhelmed by a difficult job. The prosecutor countered with evidence that Cynthia had ignored multiple warnings. Officer Chen had sent a letter to the HOA 2 years earlier, informing them that established ponds were wildlife habitat and should not be disturbed without consulting the Wildlife Commission. Cynthia had filed that letter and never mentioned it to the board. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found her guilty on all 3 counts. The judge sentenced her to 6 months in jail, suspended pending 2 years probation, plus 200 hours of community service with a wildlife rehabilitation center and a $10,000 fine payable to wildlife conservation programs. Blackwell, the judge said at sentencing, "You abused a position of trust to harm your neighbors and destroy protected wildlife. You showed no remorse, no understanding of the impact of your actions. This sentence reflects the seriousness of what you have done. I hope you will use your community service time to learn why wildlife protection matters." Cynthia stood stone-faced through the sentencing. She never looked at me. After the trial, I stopped following her story. I heard through Tom that she moved out of state somewhere in Florida. Her house finally sold, at a loss. I did not feel triumphant. The whole situation had been a waste of money, time, energy, wildlife, and a pond that should never have been touched. But justice had been served, and that mattered. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be. The pond thrived through the seasons. In spring, wood ducks did return, nesting in the box just as Chen had predicted. I watched the mother duck lead her ducklings to the water for the first time, a parade of fluff balls tumbling down the slope. Tom stopped by that evening with a beer for each of us. We sat by the pond, listening to the fountain and the frogs. "You know, Lucas, I have been thinking about putting in a pond myself," he said. "Something smaller maybe, but something that attracts wildlife. This neighborhood could use more habitat. I think that is a great idea. I will help if you want. I might take you up on that." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the koi glide through the water. Sunset surfaced near us, her white scales gleaming orange in the setting sun. She had grown since the move back, thriving in her proper home. "How are you doing?" Tom asked quietly. "Really doing. This has been a hell of a year." I thought about the question. The anger had faded, leaving something more complicated. Grief for what was lost, satisfaction at the outcome, but also exhaustion. "I am okay," I said finally. "Some days are harder than others. I miss Sarah constantly. But the pond helps. Watching things grow, seeing the wildlife return, it reminds me that life continues, that beautiful things can be rebuilt. She would be proud of you. For fighting back. For not letting them win. Maybe. Mostly I think she would just be glad I finally learned to stand up for myself." Tom laughed. "You certainly did that." As summer arrived, the pond reached its full glory. The water lilies bloomed pink and white, their flowers opening each morning. Damselflies hunted insects above the surface. The heron became a regular visitor, arriving each evening like clockwork. The turtles multiplied, and I occasionally saw painted turtles I had not introduced, meaning they had found their way to the pond naturally. Neighbors started stopping by to see it. Parents brought children to watch the fish and spot frogs. The pond became a neighborhood attraction in the best way, a gathering point that brought people together. The new HOA board created a wildlife-friendly neighborhood initiative, encouraging homeowners to add native plants, bird feeders, and water features. Several people installed small ponds or rain gardens. The neighborhood began to feel less like a sterile subdivision and more like a place where humans and nature coexisted. I started a small blog documenting the pond and its visitors, sharing photos and information about the species I observed. It attracted a following among pond enthusiasts and wildlife lovers. People from across the state reached out asking for advice on building their own water features. One message came from a woman in Raleigh whose HOA was threatening her over a butterfly garden. I connected her with Harriet, who took the case pro bono. Apparently, our victory had set a precedent that other lawyers were using to challenge HOA overreach. In the fall, the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission asked if they could feature my pond in an educational video about backyard habitat conservation. I agreed, and Officer Chen came with a film crew to document the pond through the seasons, interviewing me about the importance of protecting urban wildlife. During the interview, the videographer asked, "What would you say to people whose HOAs are preventing them from creating wildlife habitat?" I thought carefully before answering. I would say that property rights matter, but so does our responsibility to the natural world. We live in these ecosystems, not separate from them. Creating habitat is not just about aesthetics or personal enjoyment. It is about recognizing that we share this planet with other species that deserve a place to exist. If your HOA does not understand that, maybe it is time to change your HOA. The video was released in January and went viral, racking up hundreds of thousands of views. I received messages from people across the country sharing their own HOA nightmare stories and their victories in protecting backyard habitats. Cynthia Blackwell's name became shorthand in these communities for HOA tyranny. I occasionally felt a twinge of guilt about that. She had become the villain in a story that was bigger than just her actions. But then I would remember the koi gasping in the mud, the dead ducklings, the casual cruelty of draining a living ecosystem without a thought, and the guilt would fade. Docs have consequences. She had learned that the hard way. 2 years after the pond was drained, on a morning in May, I stood at the edge of the water watching the wood ducks teach their third generation of ducklings to swim. The mother duck paddled confidently, her babies following in a line. The heron watched from the far side, patient as stone. Dragonflies zipped between the cattails. Koi rose to take floating pellets from my hand, their whiskers tickling my palm. The pond was not just restored. It was better than before, richer in species and complexity. What Cynthia meant to destroy had regenerated stronger. I thought about Sarah, wishing she could see this. But in some way I felt like she was here in every blooming lily, every ripple on the water. This was the memorial I had built for her, and no HOA could take that away. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Board meeting tonight. We are discussing adding turtle crossing signs on neighborhood roads. Interested in presenting?" I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. Life had changed in ways I never expected. The fight with the HOA had transformed me from a quiet widower into a community advocate. I served on environmental committees, advised other homeowners, and worked with local conservation groups to expand urban wildlife protections. Willowbrook Estates became known as one of the most wildlife-friendly neighborhoods in Charlotte. Property values actually increased, contrary to Cynthia's dire predictions. Turns out people liked living in places where nature thrived. The pond continued to evolve. Each season brought new discoveries: a green heron in addition to the great blue, a muskrat that moved in briefly before moving on, salamanders in the filter bog, a variety of native bees that used the muddy edges for nest building. I documented everything, contributed sightings to citizen science databases, and turned my backyard into an outdoor classroom. Local schools brought students on field trips to learn about pond ecosystems. I gave talks at garden clubs and environmental groups about creating wildlife habitat in suburban spaces. The anger that had fueled me through the lawsuit and trial transformed into purpose. Cynthia had inadvertently given me a mission. I was determined that what happened to my pond would not happen to others, that HOAs would learn to value nature rather than treating it as something to be controlled and sanitized. Harriet and I stayed in touch. She specialized increasingly in HOA disputes with environmental angles, building a reputation as the lawyer who could beat neighborhood associations that overstepped their authority. We collaborated on several cases, my technical knowledge of wildlife law complementing her legal expertise. One evening in late summer, 3 years after the pond draining, I sat by the water with a glass of wine, Sarah's favorite vintage. The sun set through the trees, painting the water orange and gold. The fountain burbled its constant song. A bullfrog called from the far corner, answered by another from Tom's new pond next door. I raised my glass to the sky, to Sarah's memory, to the resilience of nature, to second chances. "We did it," I said softly. "They tried to destroy this, and we brought it back. I brought it back." The koi circled. The heron arrived for evening fishing, and the wood ducks settled into their nesting box for the night. Life continued in its endless cycles: death and regeneration, destruction and renewal. I had learned something through this ordeal, that fighting for what you love is always worth it, that communities are stronger when they value both human needs and environmental protection, and that even the most rigid systems can be changed by people willing to stand up and demand better. The pond was just water and fish and plants. But it was also so much more. It was proof that individuals could challenge authority when that authority was wrong. It was evidence that nature could thrive even in suburban spaces if given the chance. It was a memorial to love and loss. It was a gathering place for community. It was a sanctuary for wildlife. It was home, and no one was ever going to drain it again. The HOA bylaws now explicitly protected permitted water features, rain gardens, and native plant landscapes. They encouraged wildlife habitat creation. They required the board to consult environmental experts before taking any action that might impact established ecosystems. These changes rippled beyond Willowbrook estates. Other neighborhoods in Charlotte adopted similar protections. The City Planning Commission began incorporating wildlife considerations into subdivision regulations. State lawmakers introduced legislation strengthening homeowner protections against arbitrary HOA enforcement. One small pond in one backyard had somehow become a catalyst for broader change. I never set out to be an activist or a plaintiff in a precedent-setting case. I just wanted to keep the memorial I had built for my wife, to provide a home for my fish, to create a space where I could heal from grief. But when someone took that away, I found strength I did not know I possessed. Maybe that was Sarah's final gift to me. The challenge that forced me to become more than I thought I could be. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to turn, I started planning for winter. The pond needed preparation for cold weather, but I had done this before. The koi would slow down, going dormant in the deeper section Heather had built. The frogs would burrow into the mud. The wood ducks would migrate south. But come spring, life would explode again in an abundance of growth and reproduction and renewal. I would be here to witness it, to protect it, to share it with anyone who wanted to see that nature and humanity could coexist. The fight with Cynthia Blackwell and the Willowbrook Estates HOA had cost me money, time, and stress. But it had also given me purpose, community, and proof that standing up to bullies and bureaucrats could actually work. I would not wish the experience on anyone, but I could not regret how it turned out. The pond sparkled in the afternoon sun, alive with movement and color. This was what mattered, not uniformity or control, but diversity in life. Not rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules, but flexibility and respect for individual choices. Not sterile perfection, but messy, vibrant, natural beauty. I grabbed my camera and spent an hour photographing the pond and its inhabitants, documenting this moment in its continuing story. These photos would go on my blog, into presentations, into the ongoing conversation about how we share space with the natural world. As the light faded and the evening chorus of frogs began, I went inside feeling content. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to advocate for wildlife and push back against those who would prioritize appearances over life. But tonight, I could rest in the knowledge that this small piece of earth was protected, thriving, and exactly as it should be. The pond was my legacy now, Sarah's memorial and my mission combined into 18,000 gallons of living water. It would outlast me, providing habitat long after I was gone, a permanent reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought in our own backyards, and that winning them changes more than we ever imagined possible. I fell asleep that night to the sound of the fountain through the open window, the same sound that had comforted Sarah in her final months, the same sound that had been silenced by cruelty and ignorance, the same sound that now played again thanks to persistence and justice. The story could have ended in defeat and compliance. Instead, it ended in victory and transformation. That made all the difference.